Well, good evening, friends. Thanks for joining us here for our live version of our book study.
Trying something new.
Trying something new. Yeah, so we're so excited to have you here tonight. The chapters that we looked at for today are truly excellent. I think that they're really, really great.
Yeah.
And so I'm so glad that you're going to be joining us tonight.
Yeah, the pages we're looking at are pages 81 to 133, and they focus on really the second day of the conversation, and focusing on the obstacles to joy.
The obstacles to joy. So I'm going to offer us with a word of prayer as we start this evening session, and I invite you to take a posture of prayer yourself. Okay. Holy and gracious God, may this time that we spend together to look into the wisdom of both His Holiness the Dalai Lama and Archbishop Desmond Tutu. We give you thanks for their words of encouragement for us as we go through our own times of uncertainty. And we give you thanks for Douglas Abrams for his hard work in putting this book together for us and doing this interview and having this time with them. Lord, we know that through his words he felt blessed by this time, and we know that we can be blessed by their words of encouragement too. We give you thanks for Steph and I being able to be here and all those who are joining us. We ask that you bless each and every one of us in this time and in this place. We pray this in your name. Amen.
Okay, yeah, so we read a couple chapters for today, and like John said, I think they were really, really good.
Yeah.
There's a lot of great information in there. I felt like at points I was highlighting or underlining entire pages, so made it hard to narrow down the questions that we have here since there's so much good information in here. But that's a good thing to be overwhelmed with how good it is, rather than trying to scrape something together.
Yeah.
So our first chapter focuses on the topic. The title is "You Are a Masterpiece in the Making," and we'll get into what that means in a little bit. But starting off here, there's a quote by the Dalai Lama that says, "Everyone knows that physical pain is bad and tries to avoid it. We do this not only by curing diseases, but also by trying to prevent them and by trying to keep our physical immunity strong. Mental pain is equally bad, so we should try to alleviate it as well. The way to do this is to develop mental immunity." And he goes on to describe mental immunity to be learning how to avoid destructive emotions and to develop the positive ones. Okay, so when I read that, I thought immediately that connected with the time that we're living in now. So the fight against COVID-19. So did you see anything, any way that relates?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we all have experienced different types of physical pain at different points in our life, as well as mental and emotional pain too.
Yeah, everyone.
And so we know that millions of people around the world right now are experiencing the physical pain or have lost their fight to the physical virus that is present in our world. And that's caused a lot of agony and suffering around the world. We see it on the news every evening of people that have lost their fight, and that causes all of us mental and emotional pains. But also this time of social isolation has brought about a lot of mental pains for people too. Just being separated from family or from their church community or from their workplace or whatever it may be. And then, those who are that are essential workers have had the strain of having to be at work and the demands physically of trying to meet not only for the healthcare professionals to take care of all the people that are suffering with COVID-19, but all of those that are working in the stores or businesses that are required to be open to provide for us. Just the extra heavy work that they're having to do, and then the mental strain that puts on them too. There was that one, the doctor in New York, wasn't it, that she was so distraught and so hurt by everything that she had experienced through taking care of COVID patients.
And experiencing it, contracting it herself.
Contracting it herself, and then feeling not only the physical pain, but the emotional strain from everything too.
Probably the bigger part.
That she ended up taking her own life. And that was, I think we heard about that last week.
Right.
And, it breaks my heart to see people that are really struggling in those ways. And it reminds me how amazing those people that are essential workers right now really are. And how
much
grateful.
You're sacrificing for us.
How grateful we should be for them in the midst of this time. And that's actually helped me to feel better about where I'm at, where we're at, being here at home and isolating. I feel like, hey, we're really doing something of importance and value to not only protect all the healthcare workers, but protect all the people in the stores.
Yeah, that's worth it.
Yeah, definitely, absolutely.
And looking at it, it's talking about physical immunity. Of course, it makes you think of how so many people are working so hard to develop vaccines or treatments for COVID-19 as well. So all the focus that goes into that, to creating this physical immunity, but then also how we all should be caring for the physical immunity of the whole world, because there's some people that are more vulnerable to this virus than others. And, so we hear about people, a lot of people who are elderly, but also there's a lot of healthy people too that this is really, difficult, sickness for them too. Young healthy people that lost their lives as well. So you can't even predict who would be immune to this. But doing our part to stop the spread, to protect the immunity of our community, for sure.
Yeah, I think it's really, really important. Because we've watched a lot of young, healthy, nurses and doctors that have died as a result of this. And so it's really important that we keep ourselves healthy, so that way it relieves the strain on the medical system too. So
yeah, for sure. Yeah, so in that quote, the Dalai Lama talked about both mental pain and physical pain, two different things. And so in your opinion, which of the two is worse, mental pain or physical pain?
Well, I've always had a pretty high pain tolerance, so physical pain really, for me personally, feels less. I think that they both are equal for most people in many ways, and so I think that there's a lot of overlap between the two. For mental pain specifically, it can actually have physical repercussions on us as well, and so that's something that we need to keep in mind. Like, I know when I get really upset about something, my blood pressure tends to rise a little bit, and so, if that happens once or twice every 10 years, it's not a big deal, but if it happens every day, that's really a problem. So I think that they both can have the same level of destructive power in our life, but mental pain is really unique, because not only can it have the physical effect, but just the psychological effects of that pain can lead to much longer repercussions. Much longer lasting repercussions.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, we can. Looking at that question, I find it hard to answer. I think that everybody will say they're both bad. But it's hard to see when they would be separate too, because if somebody's experiencing mental pain, if they're experiencing depression or anxiety, or dealing with anger issues, like you said with the blood pressure, if you are an angry person and you let that build up in you, it'll raise your blood pressure. You could be susceptible to a heart attack or things like
strokes.
Yeah, stroke. I know a lot of our health issues have to do with our mental issues.
Yeah, and they talk about that. They talk about anxiety and stress related later on. We'll get to that. That all those things are interconnected with each other, and if we are not able to maintain both good physical health and mental health, that our longevity is really at risk.
Right.
You know?
But it goes the other way too, that if you are feeling chronic pain, if you have chronic back pain, or if you're dealing with certain diseases that like maybe like gut-related diseases that you experience severe pain with that. If you're under that amount of physical pain, how are you supposed to feel joy too? You need those needs taken care of first before you can feel happiness or joy. People who deal with chronic pain often have other mental pain as well, related to that, and just their feeling like their quality of life isn't as good as it should be because of their physical pain. All right. So moving on, Dalai Lama later on says, just as a healthy immune system and healthy constitution protects your body against potential hazardous viruses and bacteria, mental immunity creates a healthy disposition of the mind so that it will be less susceptible to negative thoughts and feelings. So, personally for you, how do you build up your mental immunity?
Well, there's a lot of things or like phrases or people that tend to get under my skin a little bit, and I think that as I've gotten older, I've learned more and more, especially in the last few years, that there are some things that we just simply have to accept that they're a part of the world. And so we have to know what triggers us and why it triggers us, and then be able to find ways to remove ourselves from that negative emotion and that negative feeling. The book describes it as being in the calm beneath the waves. So while everything is crashing over top of your head, you're in that calm space underneath.
That's not really moving too much.
That's why like when we go to the beach, I love doing the body surfing because, well, I don't want to buy a surfboard. Not that I would feel safe on a surfboard anyway.
It seems difficult.
And I don't have a boogie board, so I do the body surfing bit. And so like I love to like have that immediate rush pushing me towards the shoreline of the wave pushing me in, but it's very difficult to just run through the waves to get out into the position where you can then catch the waves. So you have to go underneath of them where it's a little bit softer and a little bit easier to move through. The energy is on the top and you can go down underneath.
Just like in our lives, there's always so much going on in the world that is not good. And you're not going to stop that, but even though that's going on above us, how can you, within yourself, be in that state of calm?
And I hope that as we move forward, we'll find the answers to that in this discussion.
For me, building mental immunity, I think there's been, like anybody else, there's instances where I do things that, like I think later on, I shouldn't have done that. Or I say things and, I shouldn't have said that. Or, I should have done this differently. Or, why didn't I think of that? Or all those types of things. And, it's good to reflect, but it's not good to beat yourself up over it. So, I usually try to be gentle with myself in those instances and just move on from it, do better next time, and learn from it, but don't say, you're such an idiot. Why'd you act that way?
You can't dwell on that place you were in because you'll never be able to move to a place you need to be.
Right. Definitely. All right, so then, again, Dalai Lama did a lot at the beginning of this year, so it's about him. So Dalai Lama says that finding the quickest and best solution to a problem is an impossible task. What do you think he means by that?
Well, if, I think we all have had this lesson before, where if you just try and find the easiest solution, it doesn't often fix the problems, and then they come up again. So if you're finding the quickest solution to to a problem, it probably hasn't actually fixed what was going on.
Yeah, right? You know, you could think of coronavirus again, always coming back to that, since that's what we're living in. With that, the quickest and best solution, everybody wants that.
Yeah.
Everybody wants this to be over.
Yeah.
But is there a quickest and best solution? There's a best solution. And I feel like, you know, a lot of our, like Dr. Fauci and
The other experts have done a lot of really good work, like helping us better understand how we can come out of this. But
it doesn't mean it's the quickest.
Yeah,
it's not as quick as people want, but it's not going to be the best solution if they're going for quickest.
Yeah.
So yeah, it is impossible.
Because they were just talking today about, you know, making the point that if we jump too quickly into just getting back to life as usual, we'll see an uptick, and we've seen this in other countries where they've experienced that uptick of cases, and we could see an increase of deaths. And in fact, last week they were saying that by August we would reach 72,000 deaths. Well, we're almost to 70,000 today.
Right.
That was only a week ago they said that, and now the administration just released new projections that by August we'd reach 132 or 134,000 deaths. So it's quite a bit. It's significantly higher. It's twice basically what they were expecting before. And so I think that that's something that we really need to take a moment, pause, consider, and then say, how can we try to get back to like things as normal as possible, but maybe where do we need to slow down, and where can we do things, and just have like a more broad understanding of the situation.
Sure. Yeah, I think with that we can tell it's hard to know what the best solution is. But we know that whatever is going to be the quickest way of dealing with things is not going to be the best.
No.
All right. So again, Dalai Lama believes that we should be building up our mental immunity. Again, talking about that. Building up our mental immunity to eventually get to the point where you no longer feel negative emotions or develop negative thoughts. The Archbishop Desmond Tutu, on the other hand, believes slightly differently. He says that we will always have negative emotions from time to time, and so we must not be ashamed of ourselves or hard on ourselves for feeling or thinking this way. So do you think it's possible to truly prevent negative thoughts and emotions, like what the Dalai Lama calls developing this mental immunity? Or do you think, like Archbishop Desmond Tutu, that these emotions are inevitable and we should just accept them and forgive ourselves for having them?
Well, I think for me, I'm definitely faithful to what God can do, but I'm also a realist in the nature of humanity. And so I think for people like the Dalai Lama, they've devoted their whole life to developing those blocks or like structures or systems to help them remain mentally immune to whatever might affect them.
Yeah, he's been working on that for decades.
For decades now, you know, and it's interesting when you look at how he talks about like his time prior to leaving Tibet and fleeing to India, and how he talks about how he, from that point forward, he was like working on that, building those mental immunities. I'm sure he was doing that because it's a part of Buddhist practice. I'm sure he was doing it before, but he recognizes now that he wasn't nearly as far as he needed to be even then. So I think that it is possible, but I think for most people, hey buddy, I think for most people, that's not going to be the case. And so I think
that's his whole job. He has the time for that. I know he's a busy person too. He does a lot. But for other people, you know, they have a family to take care of, and that's something that Dalai Lama doesn't have.
We don't all have five.
They have other careers that don't allow them to focus on this 24 hours a day.
We don't have 5 hours every morning to devote to like prayer life.
You know, that'd be hard to carve out.
So I think that you know, even though Bishop Tutu has a family and stuff.
Yeah.
He did that thing,
Yeah.
that whole thing.
Right.
He still does 2 hours, which is really amazing and really commendable. And I really think that should push the rest of us to like do more. He recognizes that those negative emotions come.
Yeah.
It's a part of the natural order of humanity and life, and so I think that knowing that it is a natural part of human life, that we should be ready for when it does occur to be able to deal with it in a healthy manner. Right. So I think that that's basically what the Archbishop is trying to express. And I don't think that the Dalai Lama would say that that's bad.
Right.
But he also is of the mindset, because he's gotten to that point for himself, that it is possible for everyone to be in that position.
Right. So. I think both men would agree that everybody should be working towards that goal. Everybody should be improving upon their compassion and their avoiding negative thoughts. It's definitely a noble goal, and so I like the idea that the Dalai Lama presents in going towards perfect mental immunity. But I agree with the Archbishop that I don't think it's truly 100% possible
for everyone.
I think that those feelings will come up from time to time, even if it's very rarely. They will from time to time, and so it's good to forgive yourself. And try to improve, but still forgive yourself too, and not be hard on yourself. All right. So Buddhists have a word. It's called dukkha, which means the stress and anxiety that arise from the attempt to control what is fundamentally impermanent and unable to be controlled. Do you think this constitutes much of society's unhappiness?
I mean, especially in the United States, we all have this like really extreme individualism. That anything that occurs, we should be able to take care of ourselves. And so I think that there is a lot of stress and anxiety that comes as a result of trying to deal with the things that are unable to be controlled. And so like the Dalai Lama talks a lot about just simply accepting things that are happening as a part of like life, and then relating to them or engaging them in that way. And that's how I think that it would be healthier to be able to do it that way. Obviously trying to change and fix what you can.
Yes, right.
But when you run into an obstacle that you're like, I cannot overcome this, work with other people to see if it can be achieved. But if it can't be achieved, even with the means of other people being present, then it's okay to accept that it's going to be present and just find a way to be healthy in the midst of it.
Makes you think of, I don't know where this prayer comes from, but I've heard it many times. God grant me this serenity or the ability to change the things I can, and the serenity to know the difference. I forget exactly how it goes. Have you heard it before?
Yeah,
Okay.
it's like,
But so to know the difference between what you can change and what you cannot.
And have peace in the midst of not being able to change whatever it is you can't change.
Yeah, exactly. I'm sure I said it wrong, but I'm sure other people
That's
have
the
heard
point.
it too. All right. So, similarly, do you think in many cases fear is a mental projection? Fear a mental projection?
I think that there are certain cases where it is and certain cases where it's not. Obviously, stage fright or making assumptions about how other people are feeling are projections of ourselves.
Right.
So like when you're married and you're dealing with like your spouse and you're assuming that they are mad at you or assuming that they are thinking one thing when they may not be thinking that, and then you're just projecting that onto them, and then that becomes what they are, even if they're not that way.
Right.
And then you say, "Are you mad?" And then they say no. And then you're like, "But I thought you were mad." So it's one of those things where, like, yes, I think that there are times when like, for instance, one thing that people do that especially like myself often do is when you're walking down the street and you see like an African American person walking towards you. A lot of times in our culture, people move to the other side of the street because they're projecting that that person might be dangerous. Or if you look at any of the instances that we see in the news of like African Americans that have been labeled as like a burglar, you know, just walking through the street. In fact, there was one like this like yesterday or a couple days ago where there was a young African American man who was out for a jog, and a dad and a son chased him down and killed him because they thought he matched the description of an individual that had broken into homes in their neighborhood recently.
Well, even if somebody thought that, why wouldn't they call the cops? Why would they think that's acceptable to take it into their own hands?
It's probably a reason why we shouldn't have neighborhood watch and just allow the actual police officers to deal with situations like that. If you feel like it might be a person like that, just call someone who's a professional to deal with it, not trying to do it yourself.
Besides the point, but I understand what you're saying there, where you have ingrained racism. And a lot of people wouldn't, admit that they're racist, but they would do things that
embedded.
Really are. Things that they, are taught through their culture. I get what you mean with that, being a mental projection. I think all racism is a mental projection. So your fear of another race is a mental projection, for sure, because you're making assumptions based on stereotypes.
Stereotypes are, here's your lesson, kids. Stereotypes is a really bad thing, and we shouldn't pay attention to stereotypes.
Yes. Okay, so again with that, obviously some fears are valid, they make sense, other ones we make up ourselves, and there's really no need for them. Okay, how should we act towards people experiencing negative emotions? So we said about, our goal is to develop mental immunity, to work towards that, and avoid negative emotions. But again, we know they're going to come up, and so how should we act towards people who do feel negative emotions? Maybe they're angry with you, or they're sad because of something that you did, or whatever.
Well, let's go with the first one.
Okay.
Because you would approach people in different ways. I think that the approach is all about compassion. But the approach is going to be different. So, for the first one, for someone who's angry, I think the first step would be asking what the problem is or what the situation is, and then listening. And being attentive to their needs. And then, it would be similar with someone who's sad, but maybe you would offer more comfort in the midst of that. But both come from a place of compassion and having compassion and empathy for that person and where they are, not knowing why they might feel that way until that conversation is fleshed out.
And it's good to acknowledge that all feelings are valid, and so validate the person in that way, that they're allowed to feel those feelings. But we'll talk about later on how anger is considered a secondary emotion. That is caused by feeling threatened or feeling fear, and so that's why it is good to talk about why somebody is angry, because there's a reason behind that. Okay. So moving on. Archbishop, speaking on serenity and calm, he said, it's like muscles that have to be exercised to be strong. Sometimes we get too angry with ourselves and thinking that we ought to be perfect right from the word go. But this being on earth at this time is for us to learn to be good, to learn to be more loving, to learn to be more compassionate. And you learn not theoretically, you learn when something happens that tests you. Okay.
Yeah, so, I listened to a quote like that, and for you and I, we both love Seinfeld. And so, there's an episode where George's dad is, has like, I I can't remember exactly how it goes, but he like goes to like the doctor, and the doctor tells him that he's having too much anger issues. That's having a negative impact on him, and so they introduce him to this thing about that's Serenity Now.
Okay.
And so the point of it is that you're I'm sorry to our cat right here, but the point of it is that you're supposed to calm yourself down, and I remember towards the end of the episode, he's been saying, Serenity now, and then at the end of the episode, he gets really mad about something George does, and he goes, Serenity now!
Greg loved that.
Yeah, Greg loved that. Yeah, but not much serenity in that statement, is there, buddy?
Greg did not feel that.
No, there's not serenity. And so I think that it comes down to we need to take time for like quiet time, for meditation, for gratitude, to be able to center ourselves, to connect with the spiritual, and to release a lot of that emotion, that energy.
Yeah, you can't just say 2 words serenity now and you have it. You have to practice it.
Because there's good types of anger and there's negative types of anger.
Yeah.
And so in this case, you need to be developing good types of connection to anger versus having negative types of connection. So it's basically the perspective. Why are we angry? What are we angry for? And then what are we doing with it?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
No, this really goes with the title of the book, or not the book, the title of this chapter, A Masterpiece in the Making.
Yeah.
And so, like he said, we're not perfect from the word go. We're not even perfect by the end of our lives. You're better probably than you were before. That's the goal. But you're still not perfect, and so we are all building these masterpieces in our lifetimes, just trying to get better and better.
Yeah. So speaking on that, for Methodists, we recognize that John Wesley especially. Charles seems to be the more stable of the two brothers.
Yeah,
John was
seem that way.
John was the wild one, and in some instances, I think it actually helped John to connect with people on a different level, and made him a more effective leader in certain ways, which is why Charles often turned to his brother to lead the movement, even though Charles started the movement. But John goes through a lot of different stages in his ministry where he feels like he goes through like a self-righteous stage, he goes through a humbling stage, and then he goes through a time of what he would call sanctification, what we call sanctification. And so towards the second half of John's ministry, he starts talking about this idea of perfection and love. And I think that fits really well here. And basically the premise is that we don't become sinless, and we don't become perfect in that we're sinless. We still commit sin. We still do wrong things. But our relationship to what we do changes, because John describes being perfected in love as being perfected in maturity and love of other people. And so in those instances, when we make a mistake, or we do some kind of sin, or we say some negative thing towards someone else, or hurt someone else, someone that is being perfected in love or perfected in maturity recognizes what they've done, makes amends to the best of their ability, and tries to then learn from it and move forward. And so that's the
Seems
biggest.
Like the best way to live.
Yeah, and so John fully believed in our mortal life that we could become totally perfect in our love for other people, including our enemies, and become totally perfect in our maturity. Not that we would always be right, but that way we would know when we're wrong, that we could correct it. So
that's wise.
Yeah.
Okay, so then our next chapter is titled Fear, Stress, and Anxiety. I would be very nervous. Okay, so Archbishop Desmond Tutu says, fear and anxiety are mechanisms that have helped us to survive. When is fear useful, and is it good to be fearless?
We love to go hiking.
Yeah.
And we love being out in nature.
Uh-huh.
And I would say probably 99.99% of the time, there's no reason to be afraid.
Right.
But there have been stories in the past of like runners or bikers or hikers being attacked by bears or mountain lions and that kind of stuff. And in that moment, there in so many of these stories, there's been moments where people, other hikers or other people, have seen what's happening and grab whatever objects are present around them and attack that wild animal to try and save that person.
Right.
They were fearful in that moment, but they transitioned their fear into energy to help this other person.
That's how our bodies are designed. When something fearful is in front of us, that we have a reaction, we have that adrenaline rush.
Heightened senses and everything.
Where you become physically stronger in that moment.
Yep.
And your body is better able to address the situations, the fight or flight reaction that we have.
So I think fear in a healthy context is good.
Yeah, right. So when it enables you to do something more, it's good.
I think being fearless is not a good thing.
Right.
So children are often fearless.
Yeah.
And it often means that they're not doing things that are in their best interest.
Right.
So
they don't know better.
They don't know better.
Right.
So like, when we've been down at your parents' house before, there's been times where like our nephew, who's only 2.5, has just booked it for the road. Just and he's quick.
Yeah,
he's very, very quick.
He's getting faster and faster.
Yeah, and your mom has said to me a couple of different times that he just doesn't know better, which is true. I mean, he's 2.5 years old.
No 2.5-year-old knows.
Yeah, he does not know the inherent danger of running into the road.
He doesn't know that he has to be fearful.
Even though your parents' street around their property is very infrequently driven.
Yeah.
It's very, very much open.
It's a quiet road.
It's a quiet road, but you just never know.
Right.
And so, there's been a number of times where myself or like, your cousin's husband have had to chase him down through the yard and catch him.
Yeah.
And hopefully he gets to an age soon where he realizes that's not a good idea.
Right.
But in that moment, like he's just running because he's just running wild and free.
Right. He already has a fear of fire. He did not like our fireplace here.
Nope.
So he's already developing those types of healthy fears to not touch fire, not touch things that are hot. But
he's afraid of the tractor.
Me too. But you shouldn't get too close to.
Yeah.
But so some fears are valid. You need to have some fears so you don't do stupid stuff and you don't do really risky things.
Yeah.
That is not wise. But other times, fear is a little more irrational.
Yeah.
Okay. So, again, Archbishop Tutu says, courage is not the absence of fear, but the ability to act despite it. The book goes on to state, the English word for courage comes from the French word coeur, which means heart. And courage is indeed the triumph of our heart's love and commitment over our mind's reasonable murmurings to keep us safe. Okay. So, what do you think of that quote, and when do you think people have shown that type of courage?
Well, it reminded us of that phrase to take heart.
Yeah.
And so, I think that there's a lot of different places where we can see people have been able to have courage over their own minds' murmurings and whatever. And I think that you could argue that someone like Martin Luther King Jr. Would know inherently the risks of moving forward and doing what he was doing.
He had so many death threats and threats against his family.
In
his mind, he had to think, this is very dangerous. But in his heart, that overruled his mind, because in his heart, it's worth fighting for.
And obviously, if he was had the knowledge or fear of those targets, it was obviously justified, knowing how his life ended.
Right.
But he still knew that his cause was worth the risk.
Right.
So I think that that's kind of what he's saying, is
Right.
that you can have courage in uncertain times and in uncertain situations, knowing that your reasoning for doing it is justified enough that it's worth whatever risk you're taking.
And usually in those instances, the person is driven by courage because they are fighting for an entire group. It's not like they're fighting just for themselves.
Yeah.
They're fighting for any number of different groups, whatever cause they're fighting for, but they're looking out for a large body of people that have been oppressed or beaten down or hurt or mistreated. And so, they that's where they get their courage from, because it's not selfish. It's acting for everyone. Yeah. Okay. So then, the book goes on, it states, it is very hard to be joyful with stress and anxiety as we have a continual feeling of being overwhelmed and not being able to handle our work commitments, our family commitments, or our digital devices that are constantly reminding us of all the things we are missing. Juggling so many things at the same time, we can feel like we are always one step behind. How can modern life lead to increased stress and anxiety?
Well, I think there's social, let me rephrase this. Society, ourselves, maybe our boss, maybe our spouse, in some instances, might expect more of us than we are capable of. And so, and I think, generally speaking, we're the ones that put that kind of pressure on ourselves. We've got a list of goals we want to achieve, and we're gonna achieve those things. Even so much as just like when you get up in the morning, there's so many days, especially in the last few months, where you and I have said we're gonna do this, and this, and we don't get it done.
No.
But we do get a lot done.
Right.
So,
the whole list.
So I think that like for us, we've been able, especially recently, to be okay with the fact that we don't get everything done.
Yeah, there's always tomorrow.
Yeah, there's always tomorrow.
Yeah.
I think that that's something that people in our society and in a lot of other societies need to be willing to accept, that there's always tomorrow. You can do this stuff tomorrow, and do the important things today that need to be done today, but don't over pressure yourself, because then that leads to all that stress and anxiety that ends up being negative, having a negative effect on your life, because it'll drain you of energy, but then it affects your personal life, it affects your family, it affects everybody around you, it affects your local community, and that's why I think, like, in this time with COVID-19, people have actually seen their stress levels drop.
Yeah,
because
some people of course have gone up for very
for other
valid
reasons,
losing their jobs and losing loved ones.
Yeah.
But other people that aren't impacted
in that way,
have been able to step back from things and feel less pressure on to do things at work, because they're not going into work and they aren't able to do all the stuff they could do before, and they get to spend more time with their family, with their kids, so they feel like, wow, I felt guilty for working so much before, but now I do have that time, so they're happy in that regard. Some people are feeling less stress.
I think that brings up a good point that you made about, like, people that have unfortunately lost their jobs in this time. That's creating a stress on the whole economy and on the whole society together. And I think that it would be really important. In the last couple of weeks in my sermons on Sundays, I've talked about how this is a time of reflection, that we can look towards the future as far as the world that we want to build. And so I think that part of what we need to look forward to is, how do we relieve these kinds of pressures from each other? So, finding ways to structure our workplaces, our society, and everything. One, to keep people employed, even in the times of panic, and to not make people a slave to their job.
Right, definitely. Yeah, that's a good point. So connected with that, a Buddhist scholar that's there present in these meetings too, his name's Jinpa. He said that modern society has prioritized independence to such an extent that we are left on our own to try to manage the lives that are increasingly out of control. Okay, so how can independence lead to stress?
I think that living further from home, not having those kind of structures, it wasn't too long ago that people never left home.
Right.
So they always had family to help them. They always
had. You lived with your extended family.
Yeah, you lived with your extended family, so you all were able to work together. So I think that we're losing some of that cooperative work.
Yeah, things like childcare.
Yep.
Would be a lot easier if the families were closer together.
Yeah.
And they could help out in that way.
Yeah.
Especially with now usually husband and wife, men and women usually all work now. So that's just one example of things that are stressful now because people move far away. They move far away from family. They're working more.
Yeah. So I think that there's a lot of issues with independence that create stress. Yeah. Independence can be really good in a lot of ways too, but I think that it's really important that we find ways to determine what is necessary. That maybe some of the things that we're doing and we're trying to juggle, we don't really need to juggle.
Right.
Now, when I was a kid, my parents had me in at most two activities at a time.
Okay.
So it was Boy Scouts and doing a sport.
Yeah.
And they didn't always overlap.
Yeah, right.
Boy Scouts was all year round.
Yeah.
Except for in the summer. But sports was only at certain times. So, maybe we don't have to do all the activities that we're doing, and we can take more time to be with family. But every family has to figure out what level they can comfortably do too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So then, just thinking about life now compared to how maybe it was 200 years ago, how do you think, which life do you think may be more stressful than another? Now or then?
I'd say now because we just have so much more going on.
Yeah.
I think when I was a kid, my grandparents used to talk about how life was simpler when they were kids. Now, granted, there was our grandparents grew up during the Great Depression, so that obviously created a lot of pressure on their families. But there was less stuff. It was basically meet the necessities of your family,
right?
And that was all you did.
Yeah. I think technology can be great, but it can be a bad thing too because people can feel so overwhelmed with constantly being connected, constantly being in reach. So for some people, their job never ends because they'll get emails in the night and feel like, well, I gotta respond, and it just sets the precedent that, it's acceptable to email at 10 p.m. and expect a response that night.
Yeah.
Even though that's not their working hours.
Yeah.
And even with work, people with texting or getting messages and stuff on other social media platforms, just feeling overwhelmed, oh, I gotta respond to this person, oh, I gotta comment on this, oh, I gotta do this post, and all of that to keep up with can be a lot of stress. It can seem insignificant, social media, but for a lot of people, it added a lot of stress in their lives.
Well, and the unfortunate thing is, we're more connected, but we're less connected.
Right.
Because we're doing it through a screen versus, doing it person to person.
Yeah.
And, that presents a lot of other problems, too.
Yeah. All right. So the Dalai Lama says stress and anxiety often come from too much expectation and too much ambition. So how can expectations and ambitions be a bad thing?
I would say that when it's good to set high goals
Yeah.
for what you want to achieve.
Yeah.
But if you aren't meeting your goals, it's going to be painful.
Mm-hmm.
And
Right.
so I think that it's good to set high goals, but set high goals that you can attain.
Yeah.
So maybe don't like create, like if you're working on a project, don't try and like say, okay, I'm going to have this one day and I got to do the whole project that one day.
Yeah.
No, if you need more than a day, give yourself time, give yourself
Right.
space to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Don't try and like jam it in at the last second.
Right.
So I think that that's part of the problem with the American business like structure too,
Yeah.
is that it's always about growth and productivity.
Yeah. Right.
And if you don't meet the expectations of the company or your
Right.
boss or yourself or whatever,
It's not constantly more,
yeah. Everything now,
Yeah.
you might get fired, and that causes stress.
Yeah.
But it's just gonna wear you out.
Right.
Just so much burnout comes in our way of life today,
Yeah.
because there's just this constant like we have to do this, 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 and we have to do these 15 things all at once.
Right. Yeah.
So
Okay, so then the book calls stress a global epidemic. So I looked up the definition of epidemic, and it's defined as a widespread occurrence of an infectious disease in a community at a particular time. So do you think that stress meets this, like the consideration of being an epidemic?
Well, the book talks about the telomere mirrors. I think that's how you say it. Is the little caps on your DNA, and how that protects your cells from illness.
Yeah.
But they talk about like how they get like broken down, and so I think that having too much stress, has, as we've talked about at the beginning of this video, has a negative impact on you physically.
Yeah.
And we're seeing all around the world, we're seeing people that are really like becoming more ill, and are really struggling with physical illnesses and just being worn out and aging quicker, because the work life or their own personal goals are so big that they are so stressed all the time that they can't achieve what they need to achieve.
Right. And it can be like a disease because it impacts your health, your
health,
body.
Yep.
Okay, so then the book also suggests that unity and seeing ourselves as not better or worse than others, so not really comparing yourselves to others at all, but instead seeing your part as you as being one part of the whole, the whole human race, is a way to just decrease stress. So how do you think that seeing yourself as part of a whole, everybody be equal, reduces stress?
Well, because it fosters relationships and connections and friendships, and in the process of doing that, you're not going to be in constant competition with each other. It's not going to always trying to be like this one-upping of each other. And I think that if we can get to a stage where we're doing collaborative work on a global scale, or at least on a national scale, and we're working together to meet the goals and the demands of our current day, we will see some really great progress in lessening the impact on us, our anxiety and our stress levels. Like it's interesting during the time of COVID, seeing all the governors in different areas of the country that have partnered together to try and alleviate the strain on their own state systems. And it is really remarkable, and I think it's a good model for what we should be acting like when we come out of this.
Yeah, just seeing that just made me think of a quote. I think it's by Teddy Roosevelt, but it goes, "Comparison is the thief of joy." And I think that's perfect. Perfect for this book.
Yeah.
And exactly true. That if you're comparing yourself with others, you're saying, well, they have the newest iPhone. I gotta get that. Or they're doing this in their life, or they got this promotion. And why didn't I get that? if you compare yourself to others, then you're just going to be miserable.
Yeah.
Okay, so next chapter, frustration and anger, I would shout. And here the Dalai Lama said, where there is fear, frustration will come. Frustration brings anger. So, you see, fear and anger are very close. Do you think fear and anger are connected?
Well, we've been talking a lot about the fight or flight response.
Yeah.
And so I think that they both are connected to that,
Right.
and so they both have a relationship to each other.
Yeah, the fight, anger, the flight, the fear.
The fear.
Yeah, so definitely your body reacts exactly the same to either of those.
Yeah, so there's, when we're talking about, people that have, maybe someone was abused when they were a child.
Yeah.
Oftentimes, not all the time, but oftentimes, they might abuse someone in the future when they're an adult.
Right.
So hurt people.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think that there is a lot of connection between the two.
Right.
If you were, in a stage of life when you were a kid where negative things happened to you, it's so easy for that to be embedded in you.
Right.
And then you just end up doing that as an adult,
you end up being
too.
an angry person
Yeah.
because of the abuse that you experienced in the past. You know, whether, it's just from the hurt that you experienced, or it could be from the fear that you were living in, fear of another person, fear of your abuser, or feeling threatened as well, and as a way to lash out against the threat, to just do that in anger. That's again, like we said, some people consider anger to be a secondary emotion, because the underlying emotion, the thing that's causing that, is a totally different emotion, but it presents itself as anger in you. All right. So regarding this connection with fear, hurt, and anger, the book says we want something that we did not get, like respect or kindness, or we get something that we did not want, like disrespect or criticism. Underlying this anger is a fear that we will not get what we need, that we are not loved, that we are not respected, that we will not be included. It then suggests that to get out of our anger, we should ask ourselves, what is the hurt that caused this anger? Or we should ask, what is the fear that I have? Okay, so what impact can stopping and asking those questions have?
Well, the Dalai Lama and Archbishop Tutu talk about that idea of vulnerability. And being willing to open up your heart to, even if it's just privately by yourself, just to really be real with yourself, or talk with somebody else and be real with them about what you're experiencing, can help you to analyze where the anger, where the fear is coming from, and then address it.
Right, and that's something that I think that could be harder for men to do. And I think that's part of the reason why you see more domestic violence cases, men committing that, more shootings or any types of violence, men committing that, because they are the ones that are more prone to anger. And I think that there's a lot of evidence that shows that the reason for that is because they feel like, well, they have to be macho, they have to be tough, that's the acceptable emotion that they're allowed to show. The underlying feelings that they are feeling but cannot admit, like fear, like admitting that you are hurting. That's not acceptable. You're not allowed to feel that way. So just do the anger, because that makes you a man, and you're not being vulnerable. You're not risking your masculinity. So like that one, I think would be easier for women to do. Luckily, more people are talking about that, and hopefully men are feeling more free to show their true emotions. I think that's best for a healthy society.
And I think that is starting to happen more and more.
Right.
And so for all the guys that are watching, when you feel like crying, do it.
You do.
I do all the time. It is a great and wonderful thing to just release that, because then you're not feeling all that inside yourself. You put it out there. I mean, it might still be there, but you're putting it out there too. You're releasing that energy, so you don't become like a ticking time bomb.
Right.
And it is, and you're right. It is, especially you know, like in the last 50 years, we've seen men starting to open up a little bit more.
Yeah.
And it
I
really...
think it's been more reason than that.
maybe been more recent than that. But I think it's really important that we do, that we don't just sit with our emotions and our fears and our angers and all that stuff, because we would be afraid of what people might think if we express that. Right. That's just stupid.
Right.
You know?
Again, it's valid for men to feel hurt. Yeah. There's nothing wrong with that, so just say it.
Yeah. So, men, you hear it from us. You can cry, and you can say when you're hurt. So, do it. It'll be helpful, I promise you.
All right. So... Okay, we're just talking about how we can avoid anger, how we should talk about the true emotion instead of reacting in anger. But do you think that anger ever has a place? Should we ever feel anger? And if so, when may it be acceptable?
I think the only time it's ever acceptable is when our anger is focused on protecting other people. When we're looking out for someone else because of some injustice or some pain that they're experiencing that someone else is doing to them. Right. And it doesn't always have to be like someone is out there like hitting someone with a club. Right. It could be the systems that we've created as humanity and the world that oppress people. So you look at like a company like a Walmart and how they make all their stuff in sweatshops over in Asia, just so we can get something really, really cheap here in America. You know?
Yeah, it's cutthroat business.
It's
to
cutthroat,
get the lowest price.
Get the lowest price. And so I think it's really important that we be conscious shoppers, so that way we can protect everyone. Because just because they're over there, just because they're a part of another country, is irrelevant, because they're a part of the created children of God. We are all brothers and sisters, and so that's really an important thing that we need to remember. And you know, as a pastor, I say that a lot. And I know that like the people I talk to in church, you know, in the moment that you're talking to them, they get it, and so I'm really glad. I just hope that goes home, because I know that all my pastor friends are saying the same thing. But there's still people out there, so there has to be people that are going to church that are hearing that message and then going home and saying, I don't care about those people over there.
Right. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, you know, just talking about that, connecting to the book, Archbishop Desmond Tutu absolutely felt anger during apartheid in many of his speeches, and you know, even in the funerals that he was doing as well. He expressed that anger, and so he, you know, would never say that, you know, don't get angry. No, he did. He got angry at both sides even. Yeah. He got angry, of course, with the white people in South Africa for the way they're oppressing black people, obviously, just like Martin Luther King did here, you know, in the civil rights movement. But he got angry at, you know, his own side as well. He talked about in the book how some of the black South Africans, they had this thing called necklacing, where, you know, and they were rightfully angry and very frustrated with their oppression, but they, you know, would put a tire around a white person's neck and have gasoline in it and light it and kill the person. And obviously that's very inhumane, and so, you know, Desmond Tutu got furious with people for doing that, knowing that's not the way to go about this. He believed in nonviolence, just like Martin Luther King Jr.
Or Gandhi.
Yeah, right? But still, he was angry with them, and he was angry at the whole system. And so that's when I think anger is appropriate, like you said, when you are fighting for a cause, fighting for a whole group of people, fighting against injustice. It's not selfish. It's selfless to be fighting against that. Okay. All right, so then our next chapter here is called Sadness and Grief. The hard times knit us more closely together. So this one I thought was a really good chapter. It was brief, but really good. And so sadness is a very powerful all-consuming emotion when you're in those times of grief. It tends to last much longer than anger or fear. Those emotions can last as little as just a few minutes.
Yep.
But sadness tends to stay. And so why do you think sadness stays like this?
Well, I think for me, I can't say for everyone, but I think for me it tends to stay because it sinks deeper in.
Yeah.
And it's, like when for the other ones, when like your adrenaline dies off, like the emotion might fleet away.
Right.
But the sadness doesn't require that. The sadness can just sit with you and reside with you for a long time, because it doesn't require the sudden burst of energy.
Yeah, it'd be awful to be in a constant, prolonged state of fear, prolonged state of anger.
Yeah.
That'd be terrible. And of course, it's the same. It's not good with sadness, but
No.
the bodily reaction with sadness is different. Yeah, I get what you're saying
Yeah.
there. Okay, so we know the evolutionary benefits and reasons behind fear and anger, and we talked about those.
With the fight or flight.
Yes, exactly. So what can be a positive that comes from our feelings of sadness? How can that turn to be a good thing?
Well, I think that, for me, in the last couple of years, I've started to experience more sadness in regards to the pain that we see other people going through.
Yeah.
And so I think it helps me to connect to people better and helps me to relate to their struggles, and to have more compassion in my own personal life for other people, even if it's just someone I see on the TV.
Right.
So.
Yeah, definitely. And that's something we've talked about previous weeks as well, where, you should feel everything. And so there's
if you're watching the news and you see something bad that's happened and you just go, well, that's too bad.
Yeah.
There's something wrong.
Right.
You need to correct that, because that individual is a beautifully created child of God, just like you, and they should be honored just like you would want to be honored. That's why Jesus said, love your neighbor as you'd love yourself.
Definitely.
If you can't love your neighbor in that moment and have compassion for them and feel empathy for them and connect to them in their sadness, there's something really broken.
Right, definitely. Yeah. Okay. So studies show that people who are feeling mild sadness, so we're not talking about, very serious clinical depression. We're talking about feeling sad.
Yeah, feeling down.
Yeah. Who are feeling mild sadness have better judgment and memory, are more empathetic and sensitive to social norms, and are more generous than those who are happy. So why do you think that is? So all of those are very good things.
Yeah.
We want everybody to be that way, to have good judgment, good memory, respectful and generous.
Yeah.
So why do you think sad people act more like that than happy people?
Because they relate to them. They think, well, if I was in that position, how would I want someone to respond to me?
Yeah.
What would I want for someone to do for me?
Definitely.
If you never feel sadness for other people's plight, then you're just going to step over them. Like I heard a story one time about a really rich person who had made some bad choices and had gone so deep into the red that they basically had, they, on paper at least, they were still living a lavish lifestyle, but on paper they had nothing.
Okay.
But they said to their daughter that homeless person on the street had many millions more dollars than they had to their name, even though they'd never spent a night on the street, even though they never spent a night destitute, and were still living a lavish lifestyle. They, in that moment, were in a state of bankruptcy, but they were they this homeless person.
Right, as if they weren't suffering. If the homeless person wasn't suffering
as much as them, because they didn't have the kind of debt that this rich person had.
Right, while living in a mansion.
Yeah, while living in a mansion.
Yeah.
So I think it's really, that's the, if you if you're that kind of person, you're never going to feel empathy for anyone.
Yeah.
So.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we've talked about about that earlier, where suffering builds compassion.
Yeah.
And that's what you need to get out of those moments. Suffering, it can be horrible, but in order to get just the smallest amount of good out of it, building compassion in yourself is the way to do it.
Yeah.
All right. So everybody wants to be happy, and yet so many people are drawn to music, art, and literature that makes them feel sad. Why do you think, what do people get out of these things? There's some days where I listen to sad music. Some of my favorite songs are very sad, but I listen to them again and again, even if I cry every time I listen to it.
If you cry just thinking about listening to them, like right now. No, I think that people are drawn to them because it helps to ground them where they are.
Yeah.
That, that life isn't always hunky-dory.
Right.
They even say that. Oh, that's the next question. It's not always hunky-dory, as Archbishop Tutu says in the book. And so, it's not always perfect.
Yeah.
But if you get to a state where you think, oh, everything's great for me, I'm awesome, my life's awesome, then you're going to lose the capacity to have empathy for other people. And we see that so often when people have all their necessities met and have money for other things, like to have the nice TV or the nice car or go on trips or have fancy food or do whatever, they very quickly lose the ability to have empathy for other people. They might still do good things for other people and help other people, but they might then end up mocking the very people that they're helping too.
Okay. But for talking about art and music or literature that's sad, I think that there's a lot of beauty in realness, in authenticity, and being genuine, and somebody opens their heart and it expresses the sadness that they're feeling. Then that's a beautiful thing, because like we said, more people should do that. More people should be open about it, because everybody feels sadness from time to time, and so everybody could connect with it at different points in their lives, and it's just rare for somebody to be that vulnerable to do it, and so it ends up being a beautiful thing when somebody is vulnerable, and so it's something very much to appreciate.
That's why the best music is always the ones that write about real things. Not just whatever, but actual real things that occurred and their experiences or experiences of people they knew.
Or why we like to read memoirs. It's real, it's true. Okay, so Archbishop Tutu, as you alluded to, said we don't really get close to others if our relationship is made up of unending hunky-doriness. Everything's good all the time. It's the hard times, the painful times, the sadness and the grief that knit us more closely together. Why is that? How can opening up about your pain be helpful?
Well, I think that when we experience great times of sorrow, and then there's people there that wrap their arms around you, you discover who the people are that really love you and really care about you and really want to be there for you. And so I think that in and of itself, the act of being present draws people to each other, and being willing to say, hey, even without saying it, but your very presence saying, I want to be here for you and carry this burden, whatever it might be, with you.
I feel that in order to have a close relationship, that you should talk about things that aren't happy all the time. Talk about the things that you're going through. I feel like in a marriage, that's the different pains that we've experienced and sorrow that we felt helped us to be closer together. And so it's tough to go through those times, but having somebody there to hold you during it, to talk to you through it, just to be present with you, to give you strength is really necessary. And
both in the times that you experience together and even in your experiences prior to meeting each other too.
Right, that are still impacting you.
Yeah, it's still
weigh on you.
Yeah, hurtful and painful. So
for sure.
And we all have those experiences. So
right, definitely. Okay, so how are sadness and joy interwoven?
For me, I think that in the midst of sadness, like there's been so many times in our marriage where we've had hard things that have happened to us, and there's that overwhelming experience of pain and tragedy and sadness. But then when the other person's there to wrap their arm around you, you know how loved you are, and that you are able to connect, like you just said, connect more deeply with each other, and through that, even though that moment might be sad, through that there is joy that occurs, to the point where like there's been times where you and I have, either you or I have been really, really hurt by something that happened, and really sad about something that happened in our life, and the other person is there to comfort the other person, and then within like a few minutes we might laugh. It doesn't take away the sadness that we were experiencing, but we still have a moment of joy together and laughing together.
Right,
so.
and I get a lot of joy from our relationship, and
me too.
I know. But because, like we said, being connected through the things that aren't so great, going through that together,
and being
those
vulnerable
lows
in them
together, and supporting one another through that. Like the joy that I feel being with you grows through the sorrow. So and it's not just in a marriage; it's in any friendship. Anything, any family relationship too, where you can feel that same thing. But then also, I just think your own sadness, just if you're experiencing on your own, and growing through that, makes you a person who's able to feel gratitude, and because of that, feel more joy. So definitely. Okay. So. All right. Well,
we told you there was a lot of goods. Real good stuff in there.
All right. Let's go on to the next chapter.
Yeah, sounds good.
Despair. The world is in such turmoil. So the big question for this chapter is, the world is in so much turmoil. There's war, there's starvation, there's terrorism, pollution, genocide. The list goes on. With hearts that are hurting for these issues, how can we find joy in the midst of such large world problems?
Well, I think we have to remember that even if we unintentionally contribute, or even if we intentionally contribute, hopefully we're not.
I know.
But even if we intentionally do that, God still offers us forgiveness. I think that's the first thing that we should remember. But God, for humanity as a whole, God's given us a lot of freedom to make our own mistakes, to screw up, but God has also given us a lot of ability to do really good things too. And so I think that we as Methodists live in this understanding of that there's always good and there's always bad. They're both operating at the same time, and so we can't eliminate all the bad that might occur, but we can lessen it with more good. And we should try desperately to eliminate the bad. But it is difficult to do, and so we have to just keep moving forward and just keep doing what we can to to fight for justice in the world, and to fight for peace in the world, and to fight for love in the world.
Right.
MLK said that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. And I do believe that we are better than we were 200 years ago.
Right,
or
and
100 years
even
ago.
on your sermon on Sunday, you talked about slavery in the Bible. That like they were addressing the world as it was back then when they were talking about that, and that's something that's 99.999% of people in the world say is bad. There's evil people who
still do it,
and there's 100% wrong and evil. And everybody should know that, but unfortunately it still exists, and we should fight against it. But as you said, back then it was acceptable, and so you could see that, over time, how our opinions have changed on that, how we're bending towards justice.
I mean, even in the United States, I mean, the whole reason why we had slavery in the first place here was because some preacher or some person, leader in the community said the Bible says it. It's acceptable. Even though it says it, we still say no, that's not correct. So when we talk about justice issues like for the LGBTQ community, there's still people that say, well, the Bible says so. Well, the Bible says slavery is okay too. The Bible says a lot of things that we recognize that God didn't say was acceptable, but that the people said that were writing scripture at the time were writing to different people. 2,000 years ago. They're not the same communities as today. So it's wonderful that we can see that we've made so much great progress, but there's still so much work to be done.
We're not at the end.
Jesus called us to build the kingdom of God here on earth. We're working on it. But friends, we got to keep pushing, and we got to keep pushing hard.
Right. Definitely. Okay, so Archbishop Tutu says resignation and cynicism are easier, more self-soothing postures that do not require the raw vulnerability and tragic risk of hope. To choose hope is to step firmly towards the howling wind, bearing one's chest to the elements, knowing that in time this storm will pass. So, why is hope harder to choose than cynicism?
Well, let's go back to MLK. Okay.
That same quote?
No, just in general.
Life. Okay,
his life.
I see.
He stepped into the wind of racism and bore his whole self in front of it. And it took him. But through his sacrifice and his hard work and his insistence that it was going to change and it needed to change, we've seen progress, even though it's not fixed. We've seen huge progress because of him and others that followed him, like some of my professors who marched with him too, my seminary professors that marched with him. But it's easier for us to choose cynicism because when we choose cynicism, we lessen our possibility of getting injured or hurt ourselves. But we should choose hope, and we should be willing to give everything for hope because Jesus gave everything for hope too.
Yeah, definitely. All right, just ending with this, I wanted to read this one quote from Bishop Tutu as well. He said, "Hope is the antidote to despair. Yet hope requires faith, even if that faith is in nothing more than human nature or the very persistence of life to find way. Hope is also nurtured by relationship, by community, whether that community is a literal one or one fashioned from the long memory of humans striving for membership, whose membership includes Gandhi, King, Mandela, and countless others. Despair turns us inward. Hope sends us into the arms of others." I thought that was a really powerful way to end here. Really reminded me of Maya Angelou's poem, "Still I Rise," where at the end she says, "I am the hope and the dream of the slave, and so I rise, I rise, I rise." Okay, and with that, how he said, how we get hope either from our community, people fighting towards our same goal, or people in the past. For her, knowing her ancestors who were slaves, how they dreamed of the freedom that she has, and so that empowered her. And the same thing for other people as well. All right.
Yeah. So we're running low on battery. So I'm going to jump to our last couple of questions here. And so we'll do this
the
last
last chapter
here.
focused on loneliness.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, a huge problem in the world
Yep.
today. Even though we're living in closer quarters, more people are living in cities, living so close to people.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, a number of people that are important people in people's lives are going downward. They're having less close relationships and experiencing more loneliness. So Archbishop Tutu says, much depends on your attitude. If you are filled with negative judgment and anger, then you will feel separate from other people. You will feel lonely. Yeah. But if you have an open heart and are filled with trust and friendship, even if you are physically alone, even living a hermit's life, you will never feel lonely. So, speaking of loneliness, is it something that we choose?
I think that we can choose to not be lonely. I think that when we feel lonely, we can change from that place and reach out, whether through the spirit that is present with us to experience connection with other people, or physically going and moving to another spot and finding someone. I think that we can choose to not feel lonely, even if we might initially feel it.
Yeah, it's hard. That's a tough question because me working in schools, it's so heartbreaking when you see kids that don't have somewhere to sit at lunch. Where a lot of times they're such sweet kids that I talk to because they feel comfortable talking to teachers because teachers are always be there for them, be kind to them. Any good teacher would do that. And so I love talking to kids who are in that situation. To be there for them in that way. But then you want them to first off have friends that are their peers. To have kids to talk to at lunch, and so that's so hard because I see kids that deserve friends. They're great kids. They have so much to offer, and for some reason, kids don't give them a chance, and so I hate that. Yeah. And so I don't know. In those instances, I know that those kids want friends too. They don't want to sit alone. Yeah. And so it's hard. I don't think they're picking their loneliness.
No, I don't think so either.
So it really does depend
on the situation.
Right, for sure. Yeah. All right. Well, let's go ahead and just end there. Yeah. So I think we had a really good discussion.
Yeah, great discussion.
As always. So next week we'll be reading pages 135 up to 189. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. I hope that you got a lot out of this, as I know that we did. And, I encourage you to go forward to work on that mental immunity that really is necessary in this time, especially with this time of social isolation with the COVID-19 virus. And know that I'm praying for you, that we're praying for you. And we ask that you would also share your prayers with us as we are going and moving forward into times of uncertainty and times of transition as well. With Steph and I in a few months moving, or in a month moving, who knows when, moving to the Wellsboro area. And for Pastor Kevin moving here, he's got a great heart for ministry, and I'm really excited for the church, for him coming. I know that he'll offer you many, many blessings in his time with you all, and so I encourage you to be praying for him in this time as we draw closer to him coming. And thank you so much for joining us tonight. I send you forth now with the blessing of Jesus Christ. Go forward and share his love with all who you meet.